graphic designer books an Airbnb for a business trip, only to discover the host is using a fake identity to trap and steal from guests. After a terrifying escape, she learns the host has vanished, leaving her constantly on edge and wary of trust. You know, I used to think I was pretty cautious. I work from home as a graphic designer and I do everything online, from ordering groceries to running my business. I know all about cybersecurity and how to avoid phishing scams. I'm tech savvy, or at least I thought I was. But this was something else. It shook me to my core and made me question everything I thought I knew about being safe online. This story is about the time I booked an Airbnb for a business trip and it nearly cost me my life. It all started when I got this exciting freelance gig that required me to travel to a different city. My client was putting on a big event and they needed some last-minute promotional materials designed, but they wanted me on site to oversee everything. I was thrilled. I hadn't traveled in ages, so this was like a mini vacation to me. I thought about booking a hotel, but then I figured, why not get an Airbnb? It'd be more comfortable, like having a home away from home. So I started browsing listings, looking for a place that was close to the event venue. I found this charming little apartment. It was modern, had a lot of light, and the price was pretty decent for a week-long stay. The host, a guy named Mark, seemed friendly enough. His profile picture showed a guy in his mid-30s, clean-cut with a warm smile. He had a bunch of positive reviews too, all talking about how great he was, and how much they enjoyed their stay at his place. I didn't think twice about booking it. Right after I booked, Mark messaged me, thanking me for choosing his place and asking for a bit of additional information. He said it was for security reasons, to make sure everything was safe and that I was who I said I was. He asked for my full name, the name of my employer, and a photo of my ID. It seemed a bit much, but in this day and age I get that people are cautious, especially with all the scams going on. So I sent it over without thinking twice. He was a verified host with great reviews, right? When I arrived, Mark was there to greet me. He was just like his picture, maybe a bit more polished. He was charming and made me feel right at home. He showed me around the apartment, pointed out where the coffee was, how to work the TV, the usual stuff. There was nothing weird about it. He even left me a little basket with snacks and a welcome note. I felt pretty good about my decision. The first few days were uneventful. I spent most of my time working from the apartment, only stepping out for meetings or to grab a coffee. Then, around the fourth day, things started to get strange. I got a call from my bank about some suspicious activity on my credit card. They said someone was trying to make large purchases under my name in another city. I froze. My heart just dropped. I hadn't lost my card. It was right there in my wallet. I told the bank it wasn't me, and they assured me they'd put a stop to it. But still, I was rattled. After I hung up, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I started to think about Mark asking for all that information, the way he'd been so friendly and welcoming. Was that just his way of disarming me? I tried to brush it off as paranoia. Maybe the timing was just a coincidence. But the more I thought about it, the more it gnawed at me. That night, I decided to confront him about it. I sent him a message asking if he'd ever had any issues with identity theft at his rentals before. He didn't respond. Not even a read receipt. The next morning, I got up early and started packing my things. I figured I'd just cut my stay short, check into a hotel, and forget the whole thing. But when I tried to leave, the front door wouldn't open. I tried everything. The lock wouldn't budge. I was trapped. Panic set in. I grabbed my phone to call for help, but it wasn't on the table where I'd left it. I turned the whole apartment upside down, looking for it. Nothing. It was gone. I realized then that Mark must have taken it when I wasn't looking. I started banging on the door, shouting for help. No one answered. The walls must have been soundproof. I was alone, completely alone. Hours went by. I sat in the corner trying to figure out what to do. Then I remembered my laptop. It was my last shot at getting out. I powered it up and tried to connect to the Wi-Fi. Nothing. The network was down. I was stuck. It must have been late in the evening when I heard the sound of the front door unlocking. I jumped up, my heart pounding in my chest. Mark walked in, looking as calm as ever. "Natalie," he said, smiling like nothing was wrong. "You seem upset. What's going on?" I demanded to know why the door was locked and where my phone was. He just looked at me, that same charming smile on his face. "I'm sorry if you felt uncomfortable," he said. "There's been a mix-up. I was trying to protect you. Someone's been stealing identities around here and I didn't want you to be a victim." I didn't buy a word of it. I told him I was leaving, that I was going to the police. His smile dropped, and his eyes went cold. "That's not going to happen," he said. "Not until we straighten this out." I don't know what came over me, but I lunged for the door. Mark tried to grab me, but I was quicker. I managed to push past him and make it out into the hallway. I ran, not looking back, until I found a stairwell and bolted down it. I kept running until I was outside, gasping for air. I flagged down a car and the driver called the police. By the time the cops got to the apartment, Mark was gone. They searched the place, found my phone hidden in a drawer, but there was no sign of him. They took my statement, and I spent the rest of the night in a hotel, too shaken to sleep. The next morning I went to the police station, and that's when I learned the truth. Mark wasn't who he said he was. He'd been using a fake name, and the apartment wasn't even his. He'd been targeting travelers like me, people with good jobs and a strong online presence, stealing their identities and using them to commit financial fraud. He'd moved from city to city, setting up new Airbnb listings under different names, using the stolen identities to cover his tracks. He'd been doing it for years, and no one had ever caught him. I felt sick, violated. This wasn't some random scam. It was personal. He'd gotten into my life, my space, and turned it upside down. The police assured me they were on it, that they'd find him. But it's been months, and there's been no sign of him. I've changed all my passwords, set up security alerts, even moved to a new apartment. But I still look over my shoulder, wondering if he's out there, watching. Every time I see a friendly smile or get asked for a bit of extra information, I can't help but wonder if it's really about safety or if someone's just trying to get under my skin. It's a scary world out there. We think we're safe behind our screens, that we can control what happens to us. But all it takes is one moment, one person with bad intentions, and everything can change. Be careful who you trust, even when everything seems perfectly normal. Because sometimes, the real danger is hiding right in front of you, behind a friendly smile and a welcoming home. A writer seeks solitude in a secluded countryside cottage to finish her novel, but discovers she's part of a sinister social experiment, where her every move is monitored and manipulated by unseen observers. Subscribe to our channel for spine-chilling, real-life scary stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat. You won't lose anything, but you'll gain thrilling tales and a community of fellow horror enthusiasts. Join us, if you dare. And I've always been a city girl, but there's something about the countryside that calls to me when I'm trying to write. You know, the quiet, the fresh air, no distractions. It's like the perfect recipe for getting the creative juices flowing. I was stuck on the last few chapters of my book, a thriller of all things, and I just couldn't get the ending right. It was like every time I sat down to write, my mind went blank. So, I decided to take a break from the noise and chaos of the city and booked a quaint little cottage through Airbnb. It looked perfect online, cozy, secluded, with a charming garden and miles away from the nearest neighbor. Exactly what I needed. When I arrived, it was even better than the pictures. The place was straight out of a fairy tale, tucked away at the end of a long gravel road, surrounded by wildflowers. The cottage itself was small but well kept, with ivy crawling up the stone walls and a little chimney puffing smoke into the air. I remember thinking, this is it. This is where I'm going to finish my novel. The first day was pretty uneventful. I spent most of it unpacking, settling in, and exploring the garden. There were all sorts of flowers and even a little pond with a wooden bench beside it. The peace and quiet were a bit unnerving at first, but I figured I'd get used to it. I made myself a cup of tea, sat down at the old wooden desk in the living room, and started writing. For the first time in weeks, the words flowed easily. I wrote for hours, only stopping when it got too dark to see the keys. That night, I crawled into bed feeling pretty good about myself. I remember thinking that maybe this trip was exactly what I needed. I fell asleep to the sound of crickets outside and the cool breeze blowing through the open window. I don't know what time it was when I woke up, but it was pitch black. At first, I wasn't sure why I was awake. The cottage was quiet, too quiet. Then I heard it, the sound of someone trying the front door handle, slowly, like they were trying not to make any noise. My heart skipped a beat, and I froze. For a second, I thought maybe it was just the wind, but then I heard it again, this time louder, like whoever was out there was getting frustrated. I slid out of bed as quietly as I could and tiptoed to the window. From my room, I could just see the edge of the front porch. I held my breath, listening. The handle rattled again, and then there was a soft knock. Not the kind of knock you'd expect from someone who thinks they're at the wrong house, but more like the kind that said, "I know someone's in there." My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. I grabbed my phone and called out, "Who's there?" trying to sound braver than I felt. There was a pause, and then a voice answered, "I'm sorry to bother you, but I think there's been a mistake. I booked this place through Airbnb, and my confirmation says I'm supposed to be staying here." I hesitated. It sounded like a young man, and his voice didn't seem threatening. More confused, really. I peered out the window again and saw a figure standing at the bottom of the steps, holding a phone that glowed in the dark. My first thought was that this was some kind of scam, a trick to get me to open the door. But then he said, "Look, I don't want any trouble. I'll just leave. I'll find a hotel or something." I could tell he was about to walk away, so I took a deep breath and opened the window just enough to talk. "Wait," I said. "I'm here alone, and I'm not opening the door for a stranger in the middle of the night. Can you show me your booking confirmation?" He nodded and stepped closer, holding his phone up to the window so I could see the screen. Sure enough, it was a booking confirmation for the same dates I had, for the same cottage. I felt a bit of relief, but also a new wave of anxiety. How could this happen? I'd heard of double bookings before, but it's usually sorted out before anyone arrives. "Okay," I said, still not opening the door. "I believe you, but it's late, and I don't know what to do. Can you wait outside until morning?" He agreed, but I could tell he was annoyed. He grabbed his backpack from the porch and walked over to his car. I watched as he climbed into the driver's seat, and then I closed the window and locked it. I stayed up the rest of the night, too anxious to go back to sleep, peeking out the window every few minutes to make sure he was still there. He didn't leave, just sat in his car, lights off, waiting. The next morning I finally opened the door. He looked rough, like he hadn't slept at all, but he still managed a polite smile. "Thanks for not calling the cops," he said. "I'm Jake, by the way." I introduced myself, and we spent the next hour trying to figure out what to do. Neither of us could get a hold of the host. His phone went straight to voicemail, and he wasn't responding to messages on Airbnb. Jake suggested we both stay, at least until we got things sorted out. I was hesitant, but he seemed genuine, and it wasn't like I had many options. The nearest hotel was miles away, and I didn't want to leave the cottage in case the host finally called back. So we decided to stay. Jake took the couch, and I kept the bedroom. It was awkward, but we managed. During the day, we kept to our own spaces. He went for long walks while I wrote, and we shared polite conversation over meals. It wasn't the peaceful retreat I'd hoped for, but it was manageable. That is, until we started noticing things were off. The first thing was the garden. One morning, I went out to take a break from writing, and I noticed the flowers I'd been admiring were all gone. Not wilted or picked, just gone, like they'd never been there in the first place. I asked Jake about it, and he just shrugged, said maybe we were imagining things. But then we noticed other stuff, like the lights flickering at odd times, or the old clock in the living room suddenly starting to work after being stopped for days. Then, one night, we both heard footsteps outside, soft at first, but then louder, like someone was circling the house. We looked out the windows, but it was too dark to see anything. I called out, and the footsteps stopped. We stayed up the whole night, each of us holding a kitchen knife, waiting for something to happen, but nothing did. The next day, we found footprints in the mud outside the kitchen door, big ones, like from heavy boots. It didn't make any sense. No one should have known we were here, except the host, and he still wasn't answering our calls. We tried calling Airbnb support, but they said there was nothing they could do unless we left a review or canceled the booking. Neither of us wanted to leave, not without knowing what was going on. By this point, I was starting to feel like we were in one of the thrillers I was trying to write. I couldn't focus on my book anymore. Every time I sat down to type, I'd catch myself glancing at the window or listening for those footsteps. Jake was just as tense, pacing the living room, checking the locks over and over. Then, 2 nights later, we heard it. A creak from the attic above us, like someone was moving around up there. Jake and I looked at each other, eyes wide. "There's no way," he whispered. We grabbed our knives and crept up the stairs to the attic door. I held my breath as he slowly pushed it open. The room was empty, just dusty old boxes and cobwebs. No sign of anyone. We were about to leave when Jake pointed at the corner. There was a small red light blinking under a pile of rags. He moved the rags aside, revealing a hidden camera, the kind you'd use for home security. We both stared at it, realization dawning. Someone was watching us. We tore the place apart, looking for more cameras. We found 3, all hidden in different rooms. One in the living room, one in the kitchen, and one in my bedroom. That's when I lost it. I started yelling, demanding to know what the hell was going on. Jake tried to calm me down, but he was just as freaked out. We packed our stuff and got ready to leave, but when we tried to open the front door, it wouldn't budge. It was like the night I first heard the handle rattle, only this time, we were the ones trapped. Jake started pounding on the door, shouting for help, but there was no one around for miles. No one could hear us. Then the lights went out. I heard Jake's voice in the dark, telling me to stay calm, that we'd figure a way out. But I could hear the fear in his voice, and it only made mine worse. I stumbled through the darkness, trying to find my phone, when suddenly a voice crackled through a hidden speaker in the wall. "You've been part of a social experiment," the voice said. It was calm, almost soothing, like it was trying to reassure us. "Your reactions are being recorded. Please remain calm. This will be over soon." I felt my stomach drop. I ran to the window, pulling back the curtains, but all I saw was darkness. Jake found a flashlight and shined it outside, and that's when we saw them. Shadows moving in the garden, figures standing just out of reach of the light. They were watching us, silently, like we were animals in a zoo. We spent the rest of the night trying to break out, but every door, every window was locked tight. In the morning, we were exhausted, barely able to stand. That's when the door finally swung open, and a man stepped inside, smiling like nothing had happened. He introduced himself as the host, apologizing for the inconvenience and telling us the experiment was over. I wanted to scream, to hit him, to demand an explanation, but all I could do was stand there in shock. He handed us each an envelope, compensation for our participation, and said we were free to leave. Jake and I grabbed our bags and ran out of there as fast as we could. We didn't stop until we reached the main road, and then we just kept going, not looking back. It wasn't until later, when I finally got home, that I found out what was really going on. I started searching online, trying to figure out who the host was, and stumbled upon a forum discussing these social experiments. Turns out this guy had been running them for months, double booking guests, setting up fake scares, all to capture our reactions on camera. He'd been selling the footage online, making a fortune off our fear. I reported it to the police, but there wasn't much they could do. Airbnb took down his listing, but who knows if that'll stop him from doing it again. I don't know what happened to Jake. We never exchanged numbers. I like to think he's okay, that he made it home safe. As for me, I haven't been able to write since. Every time I sit down at my desk, I can feel those eyes on me, watching, waiting. I've moved back to the city, but I still keep the curtains closed, doors locked, and I never ever stay in a place I can't leave.